And shall we pray? Dear Father in heaven, we truly yearn to be drawn nearer and nearer to Thee. We thank Thee, Father, for providing the precious blood of Thy dear Son, but it has to be applied to the doorposts of our hearts. We need Thy help, Father. Give us Thy Spirit in full measure. We long to become like Jesus. And more, we want to live His life so that others, as He is lifted up, may be drawn unto Thee. Dear Lord, we're in very solemn and serious times. Everything is heightening. And we just hold up each one who's in duress. Help us to be a savor of life. And dear Father, now as Sister Elaine presents, we just pray for the unction of Thy Spirit upon her. And as we participate, we just ask for Thy blessing. We want to understand truth. We want to live the truth. We want to own the truth as it is in Jesus. For truly He is the truth, the way, and the life. And we thank You, Father, for the blessing of Sabbath. And as we continue to fellowship together, may there be sweet communion amongst us. In the precious name of Jesus, amen.
Amen. Think about putting that blood on the doorposts of our heart during this time of trouble. I realize more than ever before how much we struggle, I struggle, to make it sure that that blood is on the doorpost of my heart. So yes, we need His help. Seems like we shouldn't need His help, which should be such an easy thing to do. But yet we struggle with it. Thank you. Let me get the pull up the right screen. I gotta find where I'm at, sorry. We did a review on Wednesday night. For anybody that was here, we go, this is where we want to be. We did a review on Wednesday night, and that got posted, of what we started 2 weeks ago. We left off kind of in the middle of the application of the trumpets. So we went through that on Wednesday night, only review and then finishing up what we didn't finish on that section. And then the next section was to go into Balaam, which is kind of a shorter section. But just a quick review of where we've gone through this study. Learning and understanding Josiah Litch's writings on the fulfillment of Daniel 11:40 and all the way through 45, but in particular in that time period of Daniel 11:40 at 1798, beginning with the Napoleon's expedition into Egypt, and understanding that Napoleon is the him, and that the king of the north was Syria and the king of the south was Egypt, and that the king of the south pushed against Napoleon, but did not prevail. And Napoleon continued up through Syria, and then was pushed back with a whirlwind against him and went back to France. And what was found on that, and Elder Tess brought this up last night, was part of that expedition was the Rosetta Stone. that unlocked the hieroglyphics of the Egyptian writings to be able to understand Egypt. So, so that was the first study that we did. I don't know if I'm going to review these in order, but then we did, we started to look then at the Syrian War from 1831 to 1841, and we looked at it in the two sections, first addressing 1831 to 1833, and then addressing 1839 to 1841. And we saw in that second study the restraint of Islam being in between 1839 and 1841. And we know that that was August 11th, 1840. But what that taught us when we line up with the current Syrian war of 2011 to 2021, that in those last 2 years of this Syrian war, that is 2020, and there's a restraint of Islam. So while we saw that the prediction was being made that there would be a strike, a nuclear strike against Nashville, the lines were teaching us that Islam is restrained when we look at it line upon line. So from there, we then went to, I think we did 2020, or we started with the role of Islam, and I think then we did to 2020 in the restraint of Islam. That was Brother Itabo's notes on that one. And this one here, as we continue and finish up, this was his study as well, his notes on the role of Islam. So we traced through the beginning of Muhammad. We saw that with Muhammad's ancestor, it was his father-in-law and somebody else that I think his son, I can't remember, I don't have it on the top of my head again. But that right from the beginning, not at Muhammad, but right after his death, is when you had the split between the two Sunni and Shia divisions there, that both of them claimed to be the true ancestor of Muhammad. And there was a split and a clash right there not from the beginning, but after Muhammad's death, which I thought was interesting because I shared some thoughts with Brother Itabo this week and questions that I'm kind of looking at, is if they were, when Muhammad rose up, it was Islam comes out of the bottomless pit. You've got this smoke that comes out of the bottomless pit. It's Islam, but it was only one. So there were some, if anybody watched, there was a short video that we'll talk about later that I posted in one of the group chats about ISIS. Is ISIS really defeated? I think that's what it's called, something like that. But I was reading, so I know some of you watched it because we were talking about the comments. And if you watched that video and read any of the comments, it was really interesting to see. I didn't go through in detail, but the first 10 comments that I looked at, they were people that were saying, I'm Shia and I love my brothers the Sunnis. I get along fine. It was like over and over and over again, I'm Sunni and we love all Islam. It was really interesting. And they were saying that it's the governments that get involved that cause all these problems. So I thought that was really interesting. But one of them kind of made a statement that, I don't remember exactly how he worded it, but that if the Shia and Sunnis were to unite, that the United States or the West would hate that. And I started thinking about Muhammad because the split happened after Muhammad's death. And I started pondering the thought, would they all, in the cause of going against the West, radical, not Islam itself, but radical Islam, unite in their cause in the end and be one in their when they come against the West? So I just want to put that out there as a thought that as we watch and learn from these studies.
It makes sense because it would be from the beginning how it would be in the end.
That's what I think. Before I got that far in that thought, I hadn't even thought about Muhammad and how they, it was after his death, but that came later. I just thought it was an interesting thought to see that what they perceive, some of the thoughts that were in some of these comments, that they perceived that if they were to unite, that the West would hate it. And so it was interesting. So that's where we are. We traced through Muhammad, and we went again through the applications of the trumpets, and they brought us to a different line than what we saw in looking at Daniel 11:40 and looking at the Syrian War 1831 to 1841. We see that a restraint, because in that particular study with the woe trumpets, he's placing August 11th, 1840 at the Sunday law, whereas the other line places it at 2020. So, and these are all things that we need to study for ourselves and as a group. This is a study that's being looked at. I don't have all the answers, and it's been very beneficial to study the histories, because while we're going to move on after this and go to the House of Saud, I'm also working on I went back to the 10 years of 1979 to 1989, and it's really been beneficial to spend some time in all these wars and all these histories to understand, though it may still be minor for me, but it's a greater understanding than I definitely had before I started as to what's going on and what some of the causes are. But understanding all these things and coming to, studying them and understanding them is what's going to help us. So I know we've heard Elder Parmenter, I think it's Elder Parmenter, perhaps Elder Tess, probably both, talk about not to be quick to make application. And I'm like, kind of, phew, because I'm not real good at application. But what I'm finding is, how can we make application if we don't understand who everyone is and each of these battles and what brought about these battles? So the history is good for us all. It sometimes might seem tedious, but so far it seems like everybody's been blessed in going through the history. So I'm thankful for that. And but anyway, so now we're gonna just go through this little section here on Balaam, and then we'll switch over to the House of Saud. And I know it was requested last week or a couple weeks ago that we take a break in between. So maybe if Sister Adriana, I don't know if we want to take that break after we finish this section, because there's only just a handful of slides. But if maybe we take like a 5-minute break in between somewhere between now and lunch. So if you want to maybe work that out, that would be great. And just tell me when to stop.
We usually end at 12:30, right?
Yeah.
For this one. So
is that right? 11:30,
12:36 now, so we can stop at 11:30.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So that was a quick review. And like I said, if you weren't with us Wednesday night, I know some of you were. If you weren't with us Wednesday night, you want to go back through that. That was a pretty good study too. A lot of interaction from everybody and a lot of thoughts and comments that to help us try to work through this. So so we wrapped up that, but I went back to this very last slide on this section just to do a quick review before we jump into Numbers, because this is where it then leads us is to Numbers 22. So 1979 to 1980, 1979, you have the Iranian Revolution. And it's the Iranian Revolution, which we'll see later, that kicks off the Iran-Iraq War. And I've been learning some interesting things of how that came about in the battles between Iran and Iraq and where their trouble stems from. So this revolution brought about this invasion of Iraq into Iran. Just a brief note on it. When the Shah of Iran was exiled, there was a rising up, and we'll do the more details later. But there's a rising up by Ayatollah Khomeini, I think is how you say his name. He was a Shia, and the monarchy of the Shah was supported by the United States, and people were tired of the monarchy and all the separation of the classes between the rich and the poor that was happening, and this brought rise again to a radical side. It was a radical side of Islam, of the Shia. And at the time, Iraq was majority Shia, but Saddam Hussein was Sunni. So when the Ayatollah Khomeini came to rule after this revolution, Saddam was afraid of the same thing spreading into Iraq and an uprising. So he takes advantage of the thinking that they're in disorder here, having just gone through this big change and this revolution, that he takes advantage of it and he goes and attacks Iraq or Iran. So that sparks off the Iraq-Iran war. This is the history between 1979 to 1989. What it did was, what this history is doing is it brings to power and raises up Saddam Hussein. So then we see this history here, which gives rise, in the activities that take place here, gives rise to Al-Qaeda. Then we see that the activities that take place bring rise to Islam. So, so there's a lot of histories there to understand, to watch this progressive growth going on in the Middle East. So of the applications we had on our line, 606 AD being the darkness before, and then the light comes in, and 606, it is at 627 was the key that unlocks the bottomless pit. That key was the Battle of Nineveh at 627 that allowed the spread of Islam to continue to progress. Eventually till then they took Constantinople. So on the applications, he's got July 27th, 1299. This is the first woe at 9/11. And he's got the end of the first woe and the beginning of the second woe at Raphia, 1453, marking Panium. And that was Constantinople, I believe, when they conquered Constantinople. Took the walls down, and then here was a restraint. This was the end of the second woe and the restraint of Islam. So, and we know with the restraint of Islam, looking at this history here, we saw with the restraint of Islam that you had the message that was going between 1840 to 1844, and the message that would progress. You saw the same thing back in 1529, I believe is the date that is the 490. I think it's the 490. It takes you to 2019 with the Treaty of Versailles that also brought a restraint of Islam that opened the way for the Reformation. So these histories are all connected and all linked. So August 11th, 1840s is Sunday law. We need to see the nature of this restraint at the Sunday law. At the Sunday law, Russia, the king of the South, will be prophetically dead as the king of the South. Its spheres of influence are taken by the US from 2021. So you see from here the deadly wound of the king of the South and his spheres of influence he's progressively losing, and then he's dead, pushed back all the way to just Russia at the Sunday law. And then this leads us to the study of Numbers 22. So Numbers 22, Balaam and Acts 27, connecting this to the story of the two ships. The ship of Adramyttium, Balaam was once a good man and a prophet of God, but he had apostatized and had given himself up to covetousness, yet he still professed to be a servant of the Most High. He was not ignorant of God's work in behalf of Israel. And when the messengers announced their errand, he well knew that it was his duty to refuse the rewards of Balak and to dismiss the ambassadors. But he ventured to dally with temptation and urged the messengers to tarry with him that night, declaring that he could give no decided answer till he had asked counsel of the Lord. Balaam knew that his curse could not harm Israel. God was on their side, and so long as they were true to him, no adverse power of earth or hell could prevail against them. But his pride was flattered by the words of the ambassadors. He whom thou blessest is blessed, and he whom thou cursed is cursed. The bribe of costly gifts and prospective exaltation excited his covetousness. He greedily accepted the offered treasures, and then, while professing strict obedience to the will of God, he tried to comply with the desires of Balak. Balaam is the United States of America in Revelation 13:11 that's in apostasy. The lamb-like or the good ship of Alexandria, or the dragon, the bad ship of Adramyttium. When the prophetic structure of Acts 27 was opened in 2016 to 2018, it gave us two ships, the two institutions, Alexandria and Adramyttium. The ship of Alexandria represents the good ship, the SDA and USA from 1798 respectively. The ship of Adramyttium represents a bad ship since 1989 till the Sunday law. It gives a perfect picture of the USA since 1989. It also represents the work of Balaam going forward to curse, in the dragon voice, God's people. The ship of Adramyttium, the United States, is a bad ship right from 1989 till the Sunday Law. Just like Balaam, the United States was bad as a result of his intention to curse God's people. We diligently combine the two concepts together as we see what it teaches us. I want us to look into the story of Balaam. He's been connected to an ass, or Islam, from the inception of his journey to go and curse God's people. The curse is the dragon voice of Revelation 13:11, the ship of Adramyttium. The second biblical rule of interpretation says that rule number 2, all scripture is necessary and may be understood by a diligent application and study. Numbers 22, application. Balaam began his journey in the morning by saddling the ass, the symbol of Islam. Before morning, we must have darkness preceding it. The darkness before 1989, or morning, is prophetically a symbol of the 126 years of Laodicea condition that began in 1863 with the rejection of the prophetic message. In the morning, there is light from the sun. That light is Daniel 11:40-45. That was unsealed in 1989 as our first angel's message, to shed light before sunset, the close of probation. So you've got the morning here that comes after this period of darkness, the 126. And this is when the United States saddles the ass. God uses the known to teach us the unknown. Naturally, the sun always dispenses light from morning to evening. Spiritually, God is a sun. That's Psalm 84:11, Revelation 9:2, Malachi 4:2, Daniel 11:40-45. That was unsealed for our generation is of vital importance as the general priesthood of Christ is about to close. Daniel 8:14 is Daniel 11:40-45. They are found in the book of Daniel. They are both unsealed at the time of the end. 1798, Daniel 11:40 part A, and 1989, Daniel 11 part B, respectively. They are also messages connected to our time. However, 2300 prophetic years gives us an impressive work of the opening of Christ's priesthood in 1844 on October 22nd, while Daniel 11:40-45 explains the events leading to the close of human probation, Daniel 12:1-3. There has been a huge development of Daniel 11:40-45, which we need to understand. Balaam, the United States, has been interacting with the ass, Islam, since morning 1989. From other lines, we have shown how radical Islam, Al-Qaeda, began to rise up in 1989-91 history when the United States attacked Iraq in the Iraq-Kuwait-Persian Gulf tensions. This symbolizes the saddling of the ass by Balaam from the beginning. So this rise here of Al-Qaeda, this when we attacked, the United States attacked Iraq, when we touched just briefly on the Iraq-Iran war, that war was funded by Kuwait. And I know we've heard this from other studies, just a reminder, that war was funded by Kuwait. And Kuwait wanted to be repaid for their help. Saddam Hussein didn't agree, didn't believe that he should be paying for it, that they were all should have been working together. And then I think it was Kuwait that was doing the slant drilling to literally steal from Iraq to get their money. And then Iraq, Saddam Hussein attacked Kuwait. Because the US has interests in the oil in the Middle East, and with Saudi Arabia, the United States then went and attacked Iraq. So the first smote of Balaam, the first smote of the ass by Balaam was as a result of it turning away, turning of the way. The turning from the way by the ass is a symbol of radical Islam attacking the American soil on the 11th of September 2001, when the World Trade Centers were brought down into ashes. Islam has been always the protector, Psalm 48:7, of God's people, Revelation 9:4, those that have the seal of God, and to act as a scourge against an apostate church, Rome, and a dictatorial administration. The first smote symbolized the work of the United States in invading Iraq in the name of countering radical Islam. That led to the killing of Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden. Islam was restrained just as Balaam struck the ass. So the killing of Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden brings a restraint. So there's a strike and then there's a restraint. And somebody else will have to help me with the questions in the chat if there's a question, or feel free to speak.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I just put it in chat right now. I'm asking on your line, you've got 2 yellow bars at 9/11. What does that mean?
It's funny that you asked that, because just this morning I noticed those. I never noticed them before. This was his line in his structure that I placed in here. He might be talking about, he might be marking it for Saddam Hussein and bin Laden and the death of them. But I'll ask him, because I just now this morning noticed those. I'd never noticed them sitting there before.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Yeah, but I'll ask him. The second smote of the ass finds or parallels the history of 1453 under the second woe. Under the symbol of the second woe that began July 27th, 1449, Islam was loosed to destroy or kill. In the first woe, Islam was commanded not to destroy, but to hurt only. 2021, as seen in the structure, represents the second attack of radical Islam in the American soil. May God help us to recognize its nature as we approach it. We will look into the structure that shows us 2021. And we did that study already, and that one's posted, and you've all had the notes. So I still wonder what the strike looks like. Is it a strike on the American soil, or is it an uprising that continues, that rises up again? Because one point that Brother Itabo made that I thought was interesting is that in 1989, you have the King of the North that wins, and the King of the South is defeated. And that's when you see the rise of Islam. And then in 2019, you have the victory going to the King of the South, and you see the restraint of Islam. So, the King of the North, when the King of the North is victorious, you see the rise. When the King of the South is victorious, you see the restraint. So whether or not that means that between now and 2021, is there a strike on the U.S. soil, or is it something that still continues to rise up and fester up in the Middle East and then eventually comes here? I don't know that for sure, and I don't know if any of you have any comments on that or not. But we do see something that will happen, but we don't know what it's going to look like.
There is a comment and a question.
Yeah.
So they're theorizing that the 2 lines there could be the 2 towers, and it totally makes sense because they're
Yeah.
And then the question is, don't we take the characteristics of the first 2 and use them to understand the third?
Yes. Yes. Correct. And I don't know that that's all worked out here, but yes, you take the 1 plus the second, 1 plus 2 equals the third. The basic that we know, and thank you for clearing that up, it probably is the Twin Towers. Sometimes the most basic things I totally miss. But taking the 1 plus 2 equals the third, we know at a very basic level, we know it's Islam at a very basic level, but we need to, that's why, for me anyways, that's why I've been trying to really get to know who all these people are in the Middle East and who the different factions are and why the different battles. And what's really interesting is to trace back, which I haven't been, just not started yet on the one that I really want to do is on Russia. But one thing I see, go back to, I think it's in the beginning of 1919, where you first start to see communism come into the Middle East. So there was such a mix of what was going on in the Middle East that there were actually Arabs that were communists and communist movements. So that battle for the Middle East between the two superpowers has been going on for a long time. And so what the third looks like, or when that strike is, if anybody, whoever made that comment, if they have any thoughts on that they want to share, feel free. Because I'm still just trying to understand the history and who's who. Any comment?
Well, what impressed me was when I was reading through this study, my brain was focusing in on what happened after Soleimani got killed, or things leading up to it, and what happened afterwards, and who took his place, and what his thoughts were about all of it. And I was kind of drawing a line between that and events in 2021.
Yeah, yeah. When you brought that Soleimani up, that was something that I saw a tweet. I don't remember if I shared it in the group or not, but I saw a tweet. This was a couple weeks ago, that came out of, I don't know who it was, but in the Middle East, that was talking about Soleimani, and that with his death, that they were going to come after the U.S. for his death. So I sent that to Brother Itabo, and I said, I really, I think we all need, I've kind of, with all the histories that I've been looking at, I didn't look at Soleimani. And so he's another one that we need to look at and understand his death and what that means too, because that brought anger as well, much anger to the West.
It seemed like there was a direct connection to what happened when Mohammed II came into power and took Constantinople, which we are now connecting with 2021, and what happened with Soleimani, and then the guy who, succeeded him. I can never remember his name, but, the two parallels between those histories
Maybe one study, that'd be great.
Seem pretty conclusive to me.
I just haven't gone that direction yet, and that it came to my attention when I read that tweet. I need to be looking at Soleimani too. I just haven't gotten there yet. So you probably understand that part of it better than I do. I just know that it angered people greatly, and but making any connections, I did not look at him. I have not looked at him yet, but he definitely needs to be looked at. So thank you for that reminder, actually. So the ass crushed Balaam's foot on the wall, which was a devastating scene, just as the attack on Constantinople in 1453. This begins telling us how devastating the nature of Islam is going to look like in 2021 that will escalate to speaking as a dragon. From Panium 2021, the USA will begin acting dictatorial, just as the foot of Balaam was crushed on the wall, till it's speaking like a dragon at the Sunday Law Waymark. I hope we understand the nature of the Sunday Law, and I think we all do that are present here today, the image of the beast in our history. The second smote of the ass by Balaam illustrates the restraint of Islam till the Sunday Law Waymark, the third smote, when the ass found it extremely hard to move forward. The third strike parallels August 11th, 1840, when Ottoman Empire fell in Constantinople. At the Sunday Law Waymark, just as the ass found it difficult to move forward between the narrow place, it will be vehemently restrained. The narrow place is a difficult place to pass through. This symbolizes the dragon voice of legislative and judicial actions that will act strongly against radical Islam. There are a couple of symbols illustrated in Numbers 22, like speaking of the ass and the work of the angel connected to the ass. I treated the speaking of the ass as noise because it violates the simple laws of nature, Rule 11. The repentance of Balaam can also be treated as noise because if we parallel Balaam to the United States in a dragon state, it can't work in this prophetic model. And then that's where he left this part off to go to Daniel 11:40, which that portion we already did. And that was the part on 2020 and Islam Restrained, where we went back and reviewed the history of Josiah Litch and his understanding of Daniel 11:40. Was there another question or a comment?
Comment, yes, that is his name, I recall. Ghani?
Oh, to the Suleimani's replacement?
Yeah. Soleimani was succeeded by Ismail Ghani. I'm not saying it right now. As commander of the Quds force. How do you pronounce that one?
I can't even see it in front of me.
Quds. Quds. Oh, I should know that word because it's been in the news, so I should be able to say it.
I definitely thank you for reminding me on him though, because I definitely need to work on his background and history and how and all that went on there with that killing and what that killing brought when it comes to anger against the West. So I don't know, I think Sister Christine actually said too that she agreed that we could possibly be looking at seeing, and this is why we need to do these studies to understand, we could possibly be looking at seeing radical Islam, the Shia and Sunni radical Islam uniting at the end to make that strike on the U.S. But when we saw from 2014 the rise of ISIS, or the rise of ISIS earlier, and then you had the caliphate proclaimed in 2014. It was all took place in the Middle East, and you had many parties involved supporting the various sides. So I started to look into, have not put together any notes on the Kurds as well, and the history of the Kurds. They Kurdistan is a part of Turkey, and I want to say it was 300 or 400 years. I think back in the 1500s somewhere, 400 or 500 years. I don't remember where the date was where it began. But the people of Turkey totally oppressed the Kurds, and just roughly what I remember is that they were not even allowed to speak their own language. The Kurds were not allowed to live their own lifestyle, to practice their own beliefs, to even speak their own language. They were put in jail, tortured. And so that, I think, becomes significant, the history of the Kurds, the relationship between the Kurds and Turkey, because you see now how not now, but how it was the US that was supporting the Kurds against Turkey. So, and how Turkey has a belief that the Kurds are terrorists, and that if the US is supporting the Kurds, then that makes the US terrorists. So it was interesting to see, all these different, try to bring together all these different understandings of who is who, what they believe, and how they fit into this massive puzzle. So that was the end. I told you it was just a brief thing, but there's a few quotes here that I put in here to reflect on, as we also reflect on Elder Parmenter's presentations in Portugal, where the classes where he talks about Islam or 9/11 being a harbinger of what's to come, and that about how he lays out that those passages on Nashville and the towers in New York are when there is no more, when God's forbearance ends, there's no more mercy. And so that's telling us that those visions were after the close of probation. So taking that, it's a lengthy study that he went through, but what I got out of it is that 9/11 was a harbinger pointing to what's to come. And if it was pointing to the close of probation, then what does that mean about Islam when it strikes the US? So I still don't know my own self for sure. And I know that that's the purpose of us trying to understand these histories and who everybody is, to have that light on Islam, that we would have the right light on Islam and give the right message to the people. That would also prove, we know that when there was a restraint of Islam, that it proved and gave an impetus to the work, because at the Sunday law, the work goes forward with an impetus from this. So So there's a lot still to be understood. Right now, it's just many pieces, and they all need to be brought together. So the Lord is full of resources. He has no lack of facilities. It is because of our lack of faith, our earthliness, our cheap talk, our unbelief, manifested in our conversation, that dark shadows gather about us. Christ is not revealed in word or character as the one altogether lovely and the chiefest among 10,000. When the soul is content to lift itself up unto vanity, the Spirit of the Lord can do little for it. Our short-sighted vision beholds the shadow, but cannot see the glory beyond. Angels are holding the four winds, represented as an angry horse seeking to break loose and rush over the face of the whole earth, bearing destruction and death in its path. Shall we sleep on the very verge of the eternal world? Shall we be dull and cold and dead? Oh, that we might have in our churches the Spirit and breath of God breathed into his people, that they might stand upon their feet and live. What's she referencing in that passage right there? Anybody? Where is the Spirit and the breath of God breathed into the people that they stand upon their feet and live? Ezekiel?
Yeah, 37, Ezekiel 37.
Ezekiel. We need to see that the way is narrow and the gate straight. But as we pass through the straight gate, its wideness is without limit. We need now to arise and shine, for our light has come, and the glory of the Lord has risen upon us. Where's she at there?
Revelation 18.
Maybe Isaiah 60 for sure. Isaiah 60. The glory of the Lord is risen upon thee. I think it's chapter 60, verse 1 to 5. We have no time to talk of self, no time to become like a sensitive plant that cannot be touched without shrinking. In Jesus Christ is our sufficiency. Will we talk faith? Will we talk of the glorious hope of the full and abundant righteousness of Jesus Christ provided for every soul? I tell you in the name of the Lord God of Israel that all injurious, discouraging influences are held in control by unseen angel hands, until everyone that works in the fear and love of God is sealed in their forehead. The whole heavenly universe is interested, and the law of God is exercised on behalf of his faithful commandment-keeping people. It is God in whom we must trust. It is only a narrow-minded government that legislates for the suppression of God's law. God has the world in his hand. We have God on our side. All heaven is waiting and longing for our cooperation. The Lord is supreme. Why should we fear? The Lord is almighty. Why should we tremble? In the past, God has delivered his people, and he will be our helper if we will arise in his strength and go forward. The Bible and the Bible only is to be our refuge. God in his word, he shall see of the travail of his soul and shall be satisfied. That is enough for us. I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the four angels, saying, hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. And that's Revelation 7. Four mighty angels are still holding the four winds of the earth. Terrible destruction is forbidden to come in full. That's interesting, the way she words that is in full. So it does come, destruction comes, but not in full, if I understand that correctly. Any comments on that passage? That might explain 9/11 and the story of the ass and the smote and then the restraint. The terrible destruction is forbidden to come in full. The accidents by land and by sea, the loss of life steadily increasing by storm, by tempest, by railroad disaster, by conflagration, the terrible floods, the earthquakes, and the winds will be the stirring up of the nations to one deadly combat, while the angels hold the four winds, forbidding the terrible power of Satan to be exercised in its fury until the servants of God are sealed in their foreheads. Angels are holding the four winds, which are represented as an angry horse seeking to break loose and rush over the face of the whole earth, bearing destruction and death in its path. And what do we know from our understanding of this death and destruction? Where do we get that from?
Apollyon and it's in Revelations.
Yeah,
Revelation 9:11.
yeah. Apollyon and Abaddon, death and
Abaddon. Yeah.
A terrible conflict is before us. We're nearing the battle of the great day of God Almighty. That which has been held in control is to be let loose. The angel of mercy is folding her wings, preparing to step down from the throne and leaving the world to the control of Satan. The principalities and powers of earth are in bitter revolt against the God of heaven. They are filled with hatred against those who serve him, and soon, very soon, will be fought the last great battle between good and evil. The earth is to be the battlefield, the scene of the final contest and the final victory. While their hands were loosening and the four winds were about to blow, the merciful eye of Jesus gazed on the remnant that were not sealed. And he raised his hands to the Father and pleaded with him that he had spilled his blood for them. Then another angel was commissioned to fly swiftly to the four angels and bid them hold until the servants of God were sealed with the seal of the living God in their foreheads. Sabbath afternoon, one of our number was sick and requested prayer that he might be healed. We all united in applying the physician, who never lost a case, and while healing power came down and the sick was healed, the Spirit fell upon me and I was taken off in vision. I saw four angels who had a work to do on the earth and were on their way to accomplish it. Jesus was clothed with priestly garments. He gazed in pity on the remnant, then raised his hands and with a voice of deep pity cried, "My blood, Father, my blood, my blood, my blood." Then I saw an exceeding bright light come from God, who sat upon the great white throne and was shed all about Jesus. Then I saw an angel fly with a commission from Jesus, swiftly flying to the four angels who had a work to do on the earth, and waving something up and down in his hand and crying with a loud voice, "Hold, hold, 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 until the servants of God are sealed in their foreheads." I asked my accompanying angel the meaning of what I heard and what the four angels were about to do. He said to me that it was God that restrained the powers, and that he gave his angels charge over things on the earth, that the four angels had power from God to hold the four winds, and that they were about to let them go. But while their hands were loosening and the four winds were about to blow, the merciful eye of Jesus gazed on the remnant that were not sealed, and he raised his hands to the Father and pleaded with him that he had spilled his blood for them. Then another angel was commissioned to fly swiftly to the four angels and bid them hold until the servants of God were sealed with the seal of the living God in their foreheads.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
Just in light of us recognizing that, you know, the Millerite history was a history of failure, have we placed, or would it be fair to place those holds and the angel holding back the four winds in Millerite history, since that was supposed to be the end of the world? And I'm saying that because maybe that's just, you know, self-evident, but I had always looked at those things as not happening yet. But it seems like, you know, those actions would have happened, and because God had to recognize that his people weren't sealed, you know, because they failed twice in Millerite history. So does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I wonder if it would have to be looked at in the context of, because the second woe ended August 11th, 1840, and the third woe was to come quickly, right? So the third woe would have had to come before 1863, right?
Right, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. But if the whole thing is repeated, then it happens in our line then too. You know?
And prior to 1888, it would have, I guess, been repeated maybe then also.
I don't know I think if anything, we'd have to go back and look at the history and see what was going on with Islam at that time. So I don't know. Maybe the failure, because it was a line of failure, maybe both of them are failures, 1863 and 1888. Maybe the fact that they were failures, you don't see it there. I don't know. Because I know it makes a difference because it was a line of failure as opposed to a line of success. So if it was a line of failure, would that mean that the third woe would be held and restrained?
Yeah.
To the line of success?
Right. That's all I can think of. Because when the third woe comes, it seems like that's like the destruction of the world. So
that's the way I've always seen it, as well as Revelation 18. I've always seen Revelation 18. I think that's the way it's been understood, but I don't know that it's ever been really studied to that extent. But that Revelation 18, and I go back to looking at Babylon brings a judgment upon God's people. And Babylon comes in, is allowed to come in and destroy God's people for their disobedience. But then Babylon is then conquered as well. So I have questions about that myself, because who conquers Babylon? And we've talked about that a couple of times. Medo-Persia is the one that comes in and conquers Babylon. Now is that, we look at that on one line as the United States, the two-horned power. But I mean, is there an application to them being the Arabs of the Middle East?
Sister Susan asks, so are you saying that 9/11 is the third woe, but also the first woe? Can they be both? Like the third woe.
Those are repeated. In those woes, the first woe is teaching us, the first woe plus the second woe teaches us the third woe, but we're seeing a repetition of them in application on our line. So you have the rise of Muhammad in 606, but then at 9/11, you have the first woe where or you have Balaam, where there's at the first woe, you see a strike, but then a restraint. And that all comes from the angering of radical Islam, of the U.S.'s meddling in the Middle East activities. So I don't know if I answered that question. I don't know if I have the answer, but what the lines are showing us is that we would repeat the first and second woe in our line. So on a bigger scale, like I think if this is correct, what Brother Richard is asking is that you have the first and second woe, in history, and the second woe ended August 11th, 1840, and the third woe would come quickly, but there was a line of failure, so it didn't come. But then taking the first and second woe, just like we do with World War I and World War II, taking it and overlaying them over our line and seeing an application in our line of the first and second woes repeated, leading to the third woe. And it's interesting because I was pointing out, is that in 1989, you see the rise of Saddam Hussein. Well, he's around before that. He's around in 79. You see the activities that bring rise to Saddam Hussein and bring him into power. Then you see the activities that bring rise to Al-Qaeda, that bring Al-Qaeda to rise to power, that eventually then brings a strike. And then you have the activities, and each of these activities is based on activity of the United States, that you have the interaction of the United States each time. So you have the interaction of the United States in the Middle East that then gives rise to ISIS. So they're that angry force that's seeking to break loose and are yet still held in restraint, but they eventually come and bring death and destruction.
We have a comment and a question. So are we looking now for the second woe, which also applies to the fall of Constantinople?
That's what Brother Itabo lines up with 1453. That's 1453, the fall of Constantinople, with 2021. And I don't have an answer for that because I'm not sure myself on that. It's something that needs to be studied. And I think he mentions that throughout his, in several places in his study, that we just need to be diligently praying for understanding and light. But it's been very beneficial to at least start trying to come out of knowing nothing to at least understanding some, step by step things about these different factions in all the different nations. What Saddam Hussein wanted was to be the ruler over the Arab world. When he went to go strike against Iran, he wanted to be, what's the word I heard it from, I read it and had to look it up a while back, and I heard the parliamentary use it, hegemony. Hegemony, is that how you say that word? Where he wants to be the head of the whole Arab world. So anyways, all these things lead to, and I kind of forgot the comment, I got sidetracked on the comment, if you want to repeat that.
The original, it was, so are we looking now for the second woe, which also applies to the fall of Constantinople?
And yes, so I guess we would be looking for this, the second woe, and the ending of the second woe. The second woe, sorry, so looking at the second woe, that would be a strike and then a restraint. The strike, like on the wall of Constantinople. What he points out using Balaam is the, that might have been 9/11. I mean, that might have been the Sunday law, where he points out the narrowness. I think that was at Sunday law. But yes, that's what we want to try to understand, is the second woe leading to the third woe. But if I'm understanding correctly, we're going to see the third woe. If 9/11 was a harbinger of the close of probation, then we're looking at the third woe being that final destruction. But there's all these activities that lead up to it.
Okay.
That's the best that I can say. And then you said there was something else that was a comment, I think.
Just two more questions. Next question, is there any correlation between Christ saying my blood 4 times and that of 4 holes?
I've always made that connection. And that's what I've shared those thoughts with Brother Itabo a few different times, because if I understood it correctly, that we would see 4 holes until the final destruction. And when we say hold, we saw a strike at 9/11, right? But right. There's a restraint. So there is a strike, but then there's a restraint. The result was the death of Saddam Hussein and the death of bin Laden. We saw the death of Zarqawi. We saw the death of al-Baghdadi. So each one of these things then brings a restraint. But we'll come to a point where there won't be any restraint. So that would be something to have to study out, to lay up, to put them on the line, to see on our line those 4 holds, because that's what I've thought. I'm just not able to lay it out on a line correctly, and I don't want to do it wrong. But that there's 4 holds until you see the final. Once everybody's sealed, when the sealing is finished, what happens? That's the close of probation, that sunset, right? And so if they're sealed until, if they're holding, and the my blood is the holding, then they're restrained until for that. And that's why I pointed out that one statement, I think it was in the first slide, the first or second slide, about the I'm trying to remember the words, maybe somebody remembers how it said it, but you're not going to see this, it didn't say ultimate destruction, complete destruction maybe is what it said. So why pose the question, would that explain the fact that we see the strike and then a restraint? So they're restrained from that complete destruction until the very end. That's what I'm seeing. But it definitely needs to be studied out. But our focus actually should be our dispensation in 2021.
Okay, so the last question, and then there's a statement. goes back, I think, to the second woe, which applies to the fall of Constantinople. This next question says, okay, so what about Arab Spring?
Arab Spring is, I don't know how that would line up with 2021 and 1453, because there are different lines that are being laid out. But Arab Spring, I don't know, I don't have an answer for that. Arab Spring is another history to look at. And we have looked at some of that because that's what sparked, which I think is, this kind of doesn't answer the question because I don't think I have the answer to the question, but there are Arabs that want democracy. And what I've learned from watching with the Iranian Revolution is that the Shah of Iran, it was a monarchy, it was the last monarchy of the Persian Empire. And there came to this place to where there was such a separation in the classes of people, the rich and the poor, and the atrocities that were taking place against the poor, that you get this rising up, which I think is interesting. You have a government that is oppressing, and then you have a religion that rises up. It seems to be a theme that you see throughout everything. And in the midst of that, you have those that want democracy. And that's what I've been seeing in a lot of these issues that you have, like with Arab Spring. They want democracy, but the far right religious conservatives don't want that democracy, if I'm understanding correctly. But I don't know the answer to that question, how it lines up with 1453, because that would be, from what he's putting on here at in the applications that he's using, he's following it through to 1453 being Panion, the fall of Constantinople, which is also the end of the Syrian War, not the beginning, where Arab Spring is the beginning of the Civil War. So we need to better understand the Syrian War, 1831 to 1841. We need to better understand 1979 to 1989. And then we need to take those, from what I'm understanding, we need to take those and overlay them over the Syrian War, the current Syrian War, that's 2011 to 2021. And Arab Spring actually began, I think, prior to that, and then into 2011. And that eventually then spread that idea of revolution throughout the Middle East, which was something, was it Sister Terry or Elder Tess that was talking about last night? It was Terry, I think. When it comes to the information, yeah, it was her that was reading Ronald Reagan's quotes, right? Of recognizing how information played a role, because the U.S. was in Russia with the Voice of America, is it? And there was one other one. And putting these ideas into people's minds, and it's through information. But when it comes to Arab Spring, I know I had some really very low understanding, no understanding of the Middle East. And I had no idea that they were so active on with the internet and social media. I thought there were so many restrictions there that kind of access didn't ever happen. But what they used to spark these revolutions and to plan their protests and such was social media. So it was back to the social media sites and information being spread through the internet, which goes along with the information war. But I don't have an answer to that question either.
Henry asked, does every hold, for every hold, is there a strike involved? Hold.
It's based on what we just went through, it almost looks like that, because you saw 9/11 and then a restraint. We see what went on in the Middle East, not on the US, but we saw what went on in the Middle East when they raised up a caliph, but then the caliph was killed. There's a restraint. So what it may mean, and I don't know this for sure, is that it doesn't always apply to a strike on the US. That's why we really need to understand the First and Second World better, we need to understand the Syrian War. We need to understand, the history 1831 to 41, and then 1979 to 89 to be able to better understand here. So, and I have quite a bit of history put together on 1979 to 89 that we'll work on after the House of Saud. This particular study, the House of Saud, goes into ISIS, and we'll see that. We'll see that. We're not going to get through it all today, but you get to the end of it, and you've got the death of Baghdadi. But what I found interesting in my studies is a week after Baghdadi was killed, they already proclaimed another leader. So there's already a leader of ISIS. And some reports were saying, some of the things I was reading was saying they may have done that just to give the.
Hello?
Yeah?
Sorry, could you hear me? Okay, sorry. I think my internet's been weird again. But we're at 11:30. So we can take a quick 5-minute break and just come back and jump right into it. Would that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay.
There is one more question that answers the whole part, but then asks another question.
Go ahead.
So Sister Susan says 9/11 a strike and a hold, and at Rafia a strike and a hold, and at Panium a strike and a hold, and then the four winds gets let loose at Daniel 12:1.
That's what I believe, and I don't. We need to be able to prove it though. I believe the four winds are let loose, Revelation 18, and because you have Babylon that comes in and conquers, and then Babylon's destroyed after that.
Thank you.
So we'll take a quick break and come back in 5 minutes.
Okay.
I'm just going to leave the record through the blank. I don't know. Should I stop it? I don't know.
It should be fine.
Okay. We'll be back in just a couple minutes. Okay, so back to then to begin the House of Saud. Just a quick refresher. We went through Muhammad, which was the beginning of Islam. And then we saw after the death of Muhammad, began the Sunni and the Shia divisions. Both claimed to be direct descendants of Muhammad. But now we come to the House of Saud, or Saudi Arabia, and understanding that Saudi Arabia was not always Saudi Arabia, but it's in that Arab region and with Arabs. So this is part of the factions of Islam. So anyway, so that's where we're going to go next. And the screen changed for you, right?
We're seeing the House of Saud.
Okay. Let me
The swords and the tree.
Let me figure out what I did, because it said it's paused, so.
Okay.
Let me just stop and I'll share again. Oops, I didn't mean to go too many. Okay, so now you can see it, right?
Yes, we're looking at the overview.
Okay, good. So the Saud dynasty, I'm going to skip some of the stuff that I can't read. The House of Saud, that's Al-Assad means House of Saud, the rulers of Saudi Arabia. In the 18th century, Muhammad ibn Saud died 1765, chief of an Arabian village and had never fallen under control of the Ottoman Empire. Rose to power together with the Wahhabi religious movement. We all know of Wahhabism by now. He and his son, Abd al-Aziz, who reigned from 1765 to 1803, conquered much of Arabia. So this was an area that shows it had not come under control of the Ottoman Empire. And Saud I, who reigned from 1803 to 1814, conquered the holy cities of Mecca and Medina in the early years of his rule. The Ottoman Sultan induced the Viceroy of Egypt to crush the Saudis and Wahhabis, which was accomplished by 1818. Now, does anybody remember this history that we just now mentioned? This one here, the Ottoman Sultan induced the Viceroy of Egypt. Does anybody remember that history? We studied it.
Parts of it, bits and pieces.
So when you go back to that study of the Syrian War, Egypt and Turkey, between Egypt and Turkey, 1831 to 1841, we went through the history prior to that, and what we saw is that the Sultan, the Ottoman Sultan, had the Viceroy of Egypt, which was Mohammed, can't remember his name, but he was the Pasha of Egypt, sent him on a mission. I think it was his son that actually went. The Sultan was embarrassed to have these Wahhabis in part of his territory. And so he sent the Viceroy of Egypt, the Pasha of Egypt, to go and expel them from the region that they were in. And Najd, I can't remember the name of it, where they're at. We looked at maps, and there might, I can't remember where I probably have some of those maps coming up so we can look at it again when we get there. But anyway, so this is kind of just tracing through a rough overview, just to put into connection where we are, where we read that, at least for myself, where we read that in the other study, never really connected to the House of Saud. So this is showing us we're going to see where the Wahhabis come from, and the connection here when the Ottoman Sultan sends the Viceroy to go and take out Wahhabism. This is in the time period before the Greek War of Independence. First, the Viceroy of Egypt went and took out Wahhabism there, and then they went and helped with the Greek War of Independence. And in between that is where the Viceroy of Egypt went through North Sudan and conquered part of North Sudan and opened up the slave trade that made him very wealthy and powerful with the slave trade in Egypt. So a second Saudi state was formed in 1824 by Muhammad ibn Saud's grandson, Turkai, I don't know, reigned 1823 to 34, who made Riyadh his capital. When Turkey's son Faisal reigned 1834 to 38 and 1843 to 65, when he died, succession disputes led to civil war. Power did not return to Saudi hands until 1902, when Ibn Saud recaptured Riyadh. He established the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia by royal decree in 1932. A number of his sons later ruled the country. Saud II reigned from 1853 to 54. Faisal reigned 1964 to 75. Khalid reigned 1975 to 82. Fahd reigned 1982 to 2005, Abdullah 2005 to 15, and Salman 2015. So they're all sons of this one. from going back to 1902. And it's where he made Riyadh his capital. So the parent family, talking about some background of where they come from, founded in 1720. This is the House of Saud. It went through 3 stages is what we're going to see before it became Saudi Arabia. So founded in 1720, the founder was Saud I, who died in 1725, and the current head, Salman bin Abdulaziz. And the titles that they carry are the King of Saudi Arabia. They're the custodian of the 2 holy mosques, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the King of Arabia, and King of the Nijad, I think is the word I was looking for, in the Hijaz, and we'll see maps on where those locations are. The Nijad area is like more central of Saudi Arabia, and that's where the Wahhabis were, where he took out the Wahhabis. So if I might have that wrong, but we'll see when we get to the map. So these are the different names that they go by. This is the emblem of Saudi Arabia that was adopted in 1950. And their traditions are Sunni and their religion is Islam. Here we go, the Nijad. And there's Riyadh, and this is the Hijaz. So this is where the Viceroy of Egypt came, and he came to expel the Wahhabis out of here when it was under Sultan control, when it was under Ottoman control. So the custodian of the 2 holy mosques, the servant of the 2 noble sanctuaries, or protector of the 2 holy cities, is a royal style that has been used by many Muslim rulers, including the, I'm not gonna be able to say all these words, the Mamluk sultans of Egypt, Ottoman Sultan, and the modern age Saudi Arabian kings. The title was sometimes regarded to denote the de facto caliph of Islam, but it mainly refers to the ruler taking the responsibility of guarding and maintaining the 2 holiest mosques in Islam. So you have the Mecca and Medina and the 2 holy mosques there. And Saudi Arabia are the guardians of it. Just a family tree. This is in your slide. You can look at it a little bit more on your own if you want, but it just brings you down to this last area here where you have these are all sons of Abdul Aziz down under here, where we're at today. The House of Saud is the ruling royal family of Saudi Arabia. It is composed of the descendants of Mohammed bin Saud, founder of the Emirate of Diriyah, known as the first Saudi state from 1744 to 1818, and his brothers, though the ruling faction of the family is primarily led by the descendants of Ibn Saud, the modern founder of Saudi Arabia. The most influential position of the royal family is the King of Saudi Arabia. The family is estimated to comprise some 15,000 members. However, the majority of power, influence, and wealth is possessed by a group of about 2,000 of them. The House of Saud has had 3 phases: the Emirate of Diriyah, maybe that's how it is, Diriyah, the first Saudi state, which was 1744 to 1818, and this marked by the expansion of Wahhabism. So there's key things that are going on in each of these states of it. So this is the first state of it is marked by the expansion of Wahhabism. The Emirate of Nijad, that's the second state, 1824 to 1891, marked with continuous infighting, civil war. And the third state, 1902 to present, which evolved into Saudi Arabia in 1932 and now wields considerable influence in the Middle East. The family has had conflicts with the Ottoman Empire, the Sharif of Mecca, the Al-Rashid family of Hayal, and the vassal houses of Nijad, numerous Islamist groups both inside and outside Saudi Arabia, and Shia minority in Saudi Arabia. The succession to the Saudi Arabian throne was designed to pass from one son of the first king, Ibn Saud, to another. King Salman, who reigns currently, first replaced the next crown prince, his brother Mukrin, with his nephew, Mohammed bin Naif. In 2017, Mohammed bin Naif was replaced by Mohammed bin Salman, King Salman's son, as the crown prince after an approval by the Allegiance Council with 31 out of 34 votes. The monarchy was hereditary by agnatic seniority until 2006, when a royal decree provided that future Saudi kings are to be elected by a committee of Saudi princes. The king-appointed cabinet includes more members of the royal family. So they're pretty much everything in Saudi Arabia. Saud I, Muhammad ibn Mukrin, 1640 to 1725, was the eponymous ancestor of the House of Saud, otherwise known as Al-Assad, the House of Saud, Al-Assad. He was born from the family of Al-Mukrin, a family that traces its origin to the Arabian tribe of Amir ibn Saza. He was the leader of the oasis of Daria from 1720 to 1725. The Al-Assad originated, or House of Saud originated as a leading family in a town called Daria, close to the modern city of Riyadh. If you can keep in your mind where Riyadh was, kind of central, near the center of Najd. Sometime in the early 16th century, ancestors of Saud bin Muhammad took over some date groves, one of the few forms of agriculture the area could support, and settled there. Over time, the groves grew into a small town, and the clan came to be recognized as its leaders. 2 decades after his death, Saud's son, Muhammad ibn Saud, died in 1765, made his historic pact with Muhammad bin Abd al-Wahhab. And so we know the name Wahhab. So we see his son, the son of Saud I, makes a pact, a historic pact with Wahhab, leading to their conquest of Arabia and the first Saudi state. So they make a pact that leads to their conquest, creating the first Saudi state. So Wahhabism comes out of this pact from this Muhammad ibn al-Wahhab. Sheikh Muhammad's patronymic Ibn Saud eventually gave the clan its name of Al-Assad, or House of Saud. He also had sons called Thunyan, Mishari, and Farhan. So that was Saud I, and we see here right away after Saud I, his son makes a pact with Wahhab. And that brings about the first Saudi state. Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab was a religious leader, Islamic scholar, and theologian from Najd in Central Arabia, founder of the Islamic doctrine and movement known as Wahhabism. Born to a family of jurists, Ibn Abd al-Wahhab's early education consisted of learning a fairly standard curriculum of orthodox jurisprudence according to the Hanbali school of law, which was the school of law most prevalent in his area of birth. Despite his initial rudimentary training in classical Sunni Muslim tradition, Wahhab gradually became opposed to many of the most popular Sunni practices, such as the visitation to and the veneration of the tombs of saints, which he felt amounted to heretical religious innovation or even idolatry. So you see, he has a more extreme belief practice than what his family and what he was raised to understand and believe. Let's see. Despite his teachings being rejected and opposed by many of most notable Sunni Muslim scholars of the period, including his own father and brother, Wahhab charted a religio-political pact with Muhammad bin Saud to help him establish the Emirate of Daria, the first Saudi state. I'm going to stumble these words all the way through, but I'll do the best I can. So again, pointing out that they made this religious political pact that emanated into the first Saudi state and began a dynastic alliance and power-sharing arrangement between their families, which continues to the present day of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The Al-Assad, Saudi Arabia's leading religious family, are the descendants of Ibn al-Wahhab and have historically led to the ulama, and we'll explain that one in a minute, in the Saudi state, dominating the state's clerical institutions. So we'll go look at the ulama. In Islam, the ulama, the scholar, literally the learned ones, also spelled ulema, feminine, are the guardians, transmitters, and interpreters of religious knowledge in Islam, including Islamic doctrine law. By long-standing tradition, ulama are educated in religious institutions. The Quran and Sunnah, authentic hadith, are the scriptural sources of traditional Islamic law. The earliest recorded ancestor of the Al-Assad was Mani ibn Rabi al-Muhadi, who settled in Diriyah in 1446 to 1447 with his clan. Although the Mudra are believed to be descended from Rabi tribal confederation, the Aniza branches of Rabia, Mani was invited by a relative named Ibn Dur. Ibn Dur was the ruler of a set of villages and estates that make up modern-day Riyadh. Mani's clan had been on a sojourn in East Arabia near Al-Qatif from an unknown point in time. Ibn Dur handed Mani two estates called Al-Mulibi, and I'm going to skip some of these words. I'm sorry, I'll probably be butchering them to begin with. Mani and his family settled and renamed the region Al-Diriyah after their benefactor Ibn Dur. So looking at a map here, just to show, you have Saudi and Wahhabi state, you have the Wahhabi expansion, you have the Ottoman Empire, and then Iran and other independent areas. So just to give an idea of who's located and where, this is the city that it's talking about here. And then this is Riyadh that later becomes the capital, and this is Saudi Wahhabi state. And you've got Mecca and Medina here, and this is the Hijaz, if I'm saying it correctly.
Where is the Riyadh word? Can you point to that on the map?
Riyadh?
Oh, okay, I see it now, I see it.
Right there, Riyadh, yeah. And that's the capital today. Yeah, and that's the capital today. And I just find it really interesting to study this history, and then since we all are coming so much more to understand how significant the Middle East is, but in understanding, it brings the question to my mind. It's like God placed his people in the center of all this. He placed his people, and here we are still in the center of all, just not geographically, but he placed his people in the center of it. And so you've got the Red Sea here on one side of Saudi Arabia, and you have the Persian Gulf on the other side, and then you have Iran. And all these battles, here's God's people right in the center of all of it. So, and then you have Yemen down here. The Mudra became rulers of Al-Diriyah, which prospered along the banks of Wadi Hanifa and became an important Najdi settlement. As the clan grew larger, power struggles ensued, with one branch leaving for nearby Druma, while another branch, the Al-Watban, left for the town of Al-Zubar in southern Iraq. The Al-Mukrin became the ruling family among the Mudra and Diriyah. The name of the clan comes from the Sheikh Saudi ibn Muhammad ibn Mukrin, who died in 1725. So he was the first one, and then it was his son this one's son that made the pact with Wahhab, and that formed the first Saudi state, which was the Emir of, if I say that word right, Emir of Diriyah. The Emir of Diriyah was the first Saudi state. It was established in the year 1744 when Muhammad ibn, we'll just say Wahhab, and Prince Mohammed bin Saud formed an alliance to found a socio-religious reform movement to unify the many states of the Arabian Peninsula and free it from Ottoman rule. In 1744, both Muhammad bin Wahhab and Mohammed bin Saud took an oath to achieve their goal. Marriage between Mohammed bin Saud's son, that's his son, Muhammad, and a daughter of Muhammad al-Wahhab, helped to seal the pact between their families, which has lasted through the centuries to present day. So they sealed their pact in a marriage between the son of one and the daughter of the other. And they continue that through history when it comes to this alliance with the Wahhabis. The destruction of Diriyah took place in late 1818 at the end of the Wahhabi War. This is the war that we referred to earlier, where the Viceroy of Egypt was called by the Sultan of Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, and he comes in and expels the Wahhabis out of there. And that was leading up to then the Greek War of Independence that then led to the war between Egypt and Turkey. So during the Nijad expedition, when the forces of Ibrahim Pasha, this is the Pasha that was, this is the son, Muhammad Ali was his name actually. Muhammad Ali was the Viceroy of Egypt, and Ibrahim Pasha, that's Muhammad Ali, the Viceroy of Egypt, that's his son. Unless the Viceroy is the son, I may have that, what the Viceroy stands for, but this is the son of the Pasha of Egypt. And he's the one that came and he reached Diriyah. Abdullah I tried to defend his capital with an outnumbered army. After a siege of several months, Abdullah surrendered to the Ottomans on September 9th, and with the promise of the safety of the civilian population of Diriyah, which was breached by Ibrahim Pasha, and the town was destroyed. Abdullah was imprisoned and with his treasurer and secretary was taken to Cairo, where he met Muhammad Ali, that's the Pasha of Egypt. Later, Abdullah was sent to Istanbul, where in spite of Ibrahim's promise, which is Muhammad Ali's son, of safety of Muhammad Ali's intercession in his favor, he was put to death after a show trial. At the end of the year 1819, Ibrahim returned to Cairo, having subdued all opposition in the Arabian Peninsula, entering the first Saudi state. So this battle here, 1811-18, to expel Wahhabism, is what then ended the first Saudi state. Did everybody follow that so far? I know I can make it complicated by trying to twist these names.
I'm the last point you made. I was just trying to follow, but it probably just, for me, it probably just needs to be said again because it's just new information.
Yeah.
So, but I'm paying attention, but it was just a little bit tough for me personally.
So this particular battle that's being referenced here is the battle where the Turkey, the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, asked Egypt, the Pasha of Egypt, to take out and expel Wahhabism from Arabia. And in this battle, Abdullah was imprisoned. He was told that he would be kept safe. He was taken to Cairo in Egypt, where he met Muhammad Ali. Then he was sent to Istanbul, which would be Turkey, where in spite of Ibrahim's promise, which is the son of Muhammad, the Pasha of Egypt, and this is the Pasha's son, he was taken to safety, and Muhammad Ali's intercession in his favor, he was then put to death after a show trial. And at the end of 1819, Ibrahim returned to Cairo, having subdued all opposition in the Arabian Peninsula, and this ended the first Saudi state. So they had created that first Saudi state in 1744. They created that first Saudi state. And when you have this marriage of the Wahhabis with Muhammad bin Saud and then Muhammad al-Wahhab, this marriage pact that took place, and they had the first Saudi state, which was called the Emirate of Diriyah. And it ended in 1819 when the Pasha of Egypt goes in and expels Wahhabism from the Nijad. So I know it's a lot, but it really, as the more we study it, the more we become familiar with who these people are and what they're doing, it's better, the easier, the more we'll understand how to apply and make applications using these stories using these histories as parables to understand Islam today. The thing that I found,
Amen. No, I said amen.
Okay. is to see this connection of what, because I know Susan has looked at the Wahhabis, known far about them far longer than I did, but to see this connection with the beginning of Saudi Arabia, right from the get-go, you have Wahhabism and the Saudis linked by marriage, and they stay that way till to this day. So this kind of helps too, to break it down. I like these little things that Wikipedia does to just kind of put it in simple terms, that you've got the Ottoman Empire, and under him is the Ibrahim Pasha, that's this one, who's the son of Muhammad Ali, who is the Pasha of Egypt. And they have the first Saudi state, and then you have Abdullah bin Saud, that's in this Saudi state. Anyways, it just kind of helps me, and also to put maps in front of me. So I try to lace maps through these as well to get a feel for where everybody's at and how to understand it a little bit better by where everybody's at. So this is still looking at the first Saudi state, which was founded in 1744. This period was marked by conquest of neighboring areas and by religious zeal. So you see a church-state relationship here in the beginning with this Wahhabism and the government combined. And so this period is marked by conquest, by religious zeal. At its height, the first Saudi state included most of the territory of modern-day Saudi Arabia, and raids by Al-Assad's allies and followers reached into Yemen, Oman, Syria, and Iraq. Islamic scholars, particularly Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab and his descendants, are believed to have played a significant role in Saudi rule during this period. The Saudis and their allies referred to themselves during this period as the Muwahhidin, or Al-Tawhid, the monotheists. Later they were referred to as the Wahhabis, a group of particularly strict puritanical Sunni sect named for its founder. So the Wahhabis are this strict puritanical Sunni sect. So they come from the Sunnis, and then when we go forward, you see how through this relationship, how bin Laden and others were actually created. Leadership of the Al-Assad during the time of their first state passed from father to son without incident. The first Imam, Muhammad ibn Saud, was succeeded by his eldest son, Abdulaziz, in 1765. In 1802, Abdulaziz led 10,000 Wahhabi soldiers into an attack on the Shiite holy city of Karbala in what is now southern Iraq, and where Hussein bin Ali, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, is buried. Led by Abdul Aziz, the Wahhabi soldiers killed more than 2,000 people, including women and children. Thought that was interesting as to who it is that just made me think about the verses in the Bible where they're told to go in and utterly destroy even women and children. The soldiers plundered the city, demolishing the massive golden dome above Hussein's tomb, and loaded hundreds of camels with weapons, jewelry, coins, and so they basically sacked it. And this is the golden dome of Hussein's tomb, who is the grandson of Muhammad, the original Muhammad I'm talking about, back with in 606. The attack on Karbala convinced the Ottomans and the Egyptians that the Saudis were a threat to regional peace. So again, this is looking at, what was the date it said here? 1802. Okay, 1802. Napoleon has left back to France, right? And you've got this vacuum, this power vacuum, because this is from the other study that we did with Napoleon's expedition into Egypt. You've got this power vacuum left that goes in and gets filled, that eventually leads to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire to have the Pasha of Egypt go and expel the Wahhabis. Well, this is talking about what created them there. So the attack on Karbala convinced the Ottomans, this is 1802, and the Egyptians, the king of the north and the king of the south of Daniel 11:40, convinced the Egyptians and the Ottomans that the Saudis were a threat to regional peace. Abdulaziz was killed in 1803 by an assassin, believed by some to have been a Shiite seeking revenge over the sacking of Karbala the year before. So, and this Karbala is where this dome is of the grandson of Muhammad. Let's see. So Abdulaziz was in turn succeeded by his son Saud, under whose rule the Saudi state reached its greatest extent. By the time Saud died in 1814, this is just prior to this expelling of them in 1818, his son and successor Abdullah ibn Saud had to contend with an Ottoman Egyptian invasion in the Ottoman Wahhabi War, seeking to retake lost Ottoman Empire territory. The mainly Egyptian force succeeded in defeating Abdullah's forces, taking over the Saudi capital of Riyadh in 1818. Abdullah was taken prisoner and was soon beheaded by the Ottomans in Constantinople, putting an end to the first Saudi state. So this is kind of repeating what we said before, but with more information here. The Egyptians sent many members of the Al-Assad clan and other members of the local nobility as prisoners to Egypt and Constantinople and razed the Saudi capital, Riyadh. So, any questions or comments? Are we thoroughly confused or being able to follow some of what's happening here?
No, I'm paying
I'm
attention.
following.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm paying attention. I've been printing, looking up some of the names you used, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of different short things about their movement and who they are and things like that.
Yeah, and that's what I tried to do, but it's hard. It's like every one of these you could pick apart and go
Yeah,
forward.
yeah.
And that's kind of how I, put together what I did do. It's like pick and choose, but I knew the Wahhabis we needed to understand and to find this connection between the Wahhabis and what was going on between in Daniel 11:40 when it comes to the king of the north and the king of the south and the power vacuum that was left that was taken up by what appears to be the first Saudi state. And that's when the Ottomans and the Egyptians see Saudi Arabia as a threat to their regional peace, and they go in to invade the Ottoman Wahhabi War, and they want to take back that territory.
Yeah, the Wasabis, they're extremely, extremely conservative.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's in some of these marriages recent, on our line that, or prior to our line, that it was actually prior to 1989 that they make these, I want to say things get so sometimes too much westernization, and then the religious side comes in and they want to put a stop to it. They wind up making deals with one another, just like they did back in the beginning. They make deals with one another, and I'm just going to summarize what I've been getting out of it. They make these deals with one another that then gives the religious side this power. Well, that religious side took over and they ran the schools. So the children of Saudi Arabia were being trained in these puritanical, religiously strict schools. And out of those schools came bin Laden and others. So makes a difference what your school is, what you're out, where you wind up, what you wind up becoming. So that was the education that that's going forward into this. But just to note that these relationships, these pacts that they make with one another, are what brought about in our day the education that raised up bin Laden and others. Okay, so the second Saudi state. A few years after the fall of Riyadh in 1818, the Saudis were able to reestablish their authority in Najd, establishing the Emirate of Najd, commonly known as the second Saudi state, with its capital in Riyadh. Compared to the first Saudi state, the second Saudi period was marked by less territorial expansion. It never reconquered the Hijaz or Azur, for example, and less religious zeal, although the Saudi leaders continued to go by the title of Imam and still employed Salafi religious scholars. The second state was also marked by severe internal conflicts within the Saudi family. So this is the period where they have civil war going on, eventually leading to the dynasty's downfall. We know that if you wind up being divided, eventually you fall. In all but one instance, succession occurred by assassination or civil war, the exception being the passage of authority from Faisal ibn Turki to his son, Abdullah ibn Faisal ibn Turki. The Emirate of Nijad was the second state. This is kind of just a repeat with a little more information. It was existing between 1824. So we see there was this period of time from 1818 when they expelled the Wahhabis, and that was the end of the first Saudi state, to then 1824 when they began again. And that went all the way to 1891. In the Nijad, the regions of Riyadh and Hali of what is now Saudi Arabia. Saudi rule was restored to Central and Eastern Arabia after the Emirate of Riyadh, the first Saudi state, having previously been brought down by the Ottoman Empire's Egypt eyalet in the Ottoman Wahhabi War. The second Saudi period was marked by less territorial expansion and less religious zeal, although the Saudi leaders continued to be called Ayman and still employed Wahhabist religious scholars. Turk bin Muhammad's reconquest of Riyadh from Egyptian forces in 1824 is generally regarded as the beginning of the Saudi state, the second Saudi state. Severe internal conflicts within the House of Saud eventually led to the dynasty's downfall. The Battle of Mulaida in 1891 between the forces loyal to the lost Saudi Ayman and Rashidi dynasty of Hale. So if we remember right, this, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Hale or Hale, this was one of the ones that said that they always had problems with. There was a list of them in the first couple of slides that they always had problems with. And so those names do show up here throughout as we continue to progress. So just to give another look at understanding our bearings of where we're at, we see Yemen down here and Oman down here. And this being Saudi Arabia, you have Riyadh, the capital. And then we have, this is Mecca and Medina, and this is the Hijaz, and this was the Najd area here. To keep our bearings even more so, in here you've got Syria, Iraq, and Kuwait to keep us into perspective with the Iran-Iraq War, because we're going to look at that in another study. The Iran-Iraq War and what culminated in eventually Iraq then, or the United States coming in and helping. When this battle here went on, it started to threaten the world's oil supply, which brought in the superpowers into this region. And so then when Iraq then attacked Kuwait, you have the US that comes in. So just to keep our perspective of where all these areas are, we know that Qatar is, I believe the US has a base there in Qatar.
Yes.
Yeah, so
I think that's our most powerful. We have the most like military in Qatar than anywhere else in the world.
really?
Something to that effect, or the most bases, yeah.
It's interesting when we get to, as we go through this study, I don't know how far we get today, but as we go through this study of the agreement that once oil was discovered and the agreement that was made with the US, that is when you start to see a lot of the problems come along too. Because the Saudis came into agreement with in the US, and that didn't make the Wahhabi side happy. So anyways, good to know where all these things are transpiring. It's kind of funny, as a kid, I always kind of liked to look at maps. Never really understood much, but I like to look at maps. So Saudi Arabia, after his defeat at Mulaida, Abdul Rahman ibn Faisal went with his family into exile in the deserts of eastern Arabia among the Almura Bedouin. Soon after, however, he found refuge in Kuwait as a guest of the Kuwaiti Emir Murbaka al-Sabah. In 1902, Abdul Raham's son, Abdul Aziz, took on the task of restoring Saudi rule in Riyadh. So this is Abdul Aziz here. He took on the task of restoring Saudi rule in Riyadh. Supported by a few dozen followers and accompanied by some of his brothers and relatives, Abdul Aziz was able to capture Riyadh's Mazmak fort and kill the governor appointed there by Ibn Rashid. Abdul Aziz, reported to have been barely 20 at the time, was immediately proclaimed the ruler of Riyadh. As the new leader of the House of Saud, Abdul Aziz became commonly known from that time onward as Ibn Saud. In Western sources, though, he is still called Abdul Aziz in the Arab world. Ibn Saud spent the next 3 decades trying to reestablish his family's rule over Central Arabia, starting with his native Najd. His chief rivals were the Al-Rashid, this was one that was mentioned earlier, clan in Hale, and the sheriffs of Mecca in the Hijaz, and the Ottoman Turks in Al-Assad. So I don't know if I can back up to that map. We know where Mecca is, if we can remember where Mecca is. This one, we need to look at the map for that one, because that one I don't remember. And we know where the Ottoman Turks are. Ibn Saud also had to contend, however, with the descendants of his late uncle, Saud ibn Faisal, later known as the Saud al-Kabir branch of the family, who posed as the rightful heirs to the throne, though for a time acknowledging the sovereignty of the Ottoman sultans and even taking the title of Pasha. It was the sultan that gave those titles. And that's how the Egyptian Muhammad Ali got his title. They're given that title. It's a title that they wind up being, they are like the Ottomans ruled over the whole thing, and then they had leaders in their territories, and the Pasha was a title that they were given by the Ottomans. So Ibn Saud allied himself to the British in opposition to the Ottoman-backed Al-Rashid. From 1915 to 1927, Ibn Saud's dominions were a protectorate of the British Empire, pursuant of the 1915 Treaty of Dayton. And I think it's something good to look at too that's been coming to my attention when it comes to like the US and Britain, because I'm really lame in all this stuff. And some of you guys probably knew this from history, but I never did. But I knew bits and pieces, but of the British rule and the British colonization that took place in all this, because when Napoleon went on his expedition of Egypt, he went because that expedition was him wanting to, I don't know if remove's the right word, but he wanted to take away the British trade that British had with India, and he wanted to take over and conquer the Mediterranean, and he wanted to stop the trade routes and establish a trade route through where he went to explore the what's called the Canal of the Pharaohs, where they began to build what is today the Suez Canal. So he was trying to cut off trade from Britain. So there's a lot to be understood about the British rule in setting up colonization in all these areas. So, and that's something else that they all, through these years, had gone through as well, was this British colonization, as well as Western influence of the U.S. come later, that they eventually rise up and don't want. But you got the ones that want democracy, and then you have this religious sect that doesn't, and there's a whole lot in between. And a lot to understand, that's for sure. So Ibn Saud won final victory over the Rashidis in 1921, making him the ruler of most of Central Arabia. He consolidated his dominions as the Sultanate of Najd. He then turned his attention to the Hijaz, that's where Mecca and Medina are, finally conquering it in 1926. So back in the area where the Wahhabis originally were, where the Nijad is, he's over that, and then he turns to the Hijaz, which is Mecca and Medina, and conquers in 1926, just months before the British Protectorate ended. For the next 5.5 years, he administered the two parts of his dual realm, of the Kingdom of Hijaz and Najd as separate units. So he kept them for 5.5 years as separate units. By 1932, Ibn Saud had disposed of all his main rivals and consolidated his rule over much of the Arabian Peninsula. He united his dominions into the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that year. This is 1932. Ibn Saud's father, Abdul Rahman, retained the honorary title of Ayman. In 1937, near Dammam, American surveyors discovered what later proved to be Saudi Arabia's vast oil reserves. Before the discovery of oil, many family members were destitute. So in comes the oil, and in comes their wealth, and also in comes a treaty or a pact with the U.S. Ibn Saud sired dozens of children by his many wives. He had at most 4 wives at a time, divorcing many. And I think I read in another place, and it may be in the notes somewhere, but that according to the Quran, they could only have 4 wives at a time. I don't know if anybody's ever read that, but I remember reading that in some of these studies. But that they could only have 4 at a time. So he had at most at one time 4 wives at a time, but he had many wives, but 4 at a time. And he divorced many times. He made sure to marry into many of the noble clans and tribes within his territory. So into these noble clans, and that's what gathers up in making all these pacts and being able to spread and grow. So including the chiefs of Bani Khalid, Ajman, and Shamar tribes, as well as the Al-Assad Sheikh descendants of Wahhab. So you see, this is back in the beginning of Saudi Arabia, 1932, where he marries many wives. He sees to make these connections. And so at the beginning of Saudi Arabia, just like at the beginning of the first emirate of Diriyah, which was the first Saudi state, there was a marriage pact. And we see here with Ibn Saud that there was a marriage pact with Wahhab. He also arranged for his sons and relatives to enter into similar marriages. He appointed his eldest surviving son, Saud, as heir apparent, to be succeeded by the next eldest son, Faisal. The Saudi family became known as the royal family, and each member, male and female, was accorded the title Amr, Prince, or Amira, Princess, respectively. Ibn Saud died in 1953 after having cemented an alliance with the United States in 1945. He is still celebrated officially as the founder, and only his direct descendants may take on the title of His or Her Royal Highness. The date of his recapture of Riyadh in 1902 was chosen to mark Saudi Arabia's centennial in 1999, according to the Islamic lunar calendar. Upon Ibn Saud's death, and we know in 1999, isn't that where Putin became president of Russia? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Upon Ibn Saud's death, his son Saud assumed the throne without incident, but his lavish spending led to a power struggle with his brother, Crown Prince Faisal. In 1964, the royal family forced Saud to abdicate in favor of Faisal, aided by an edict from the country's Grand Mufti. During this period, some of Ibn Saud's younger sons, led by Tali ibn Abdulaziz, defected to Egypt, calling themselves the Free Princes and calling for liberalization and reform, but were later induced to return by Faisal. So you see these ones here defecting and going to Egypt, calling themselves the Free Princes. They were wanting reform and liberty, liberalization. They wanted to be liberal. And what happens when you want to become liberal? You're going to raise up the conservatives to fight against you. So they were later induced to return by Faisal. And these are all sons, if you remember that chart that we put up in the beginning, these are all sons of Ibn Saud, all the way up to where we currently stand. I would, my own self thought, well, how could that be? But when they marry so many wives and they marry up and they're having children all the way till I don't know how old, but they're having children until they're quite old. So all these sons are the ones that will succeed him. They were fully pardoned, but were also barred from any future positions in the government. Those were the ones that went defected to Egypt. Faisal was assassinated in 1975. And if you think about it too, when think about the dynamics of, and we'll look at that somewhat, the dynamics of, you know, they were, before oil, they were destitute, and now oil comes in and they have all this money. What does that, think about what that does to their lifestyle. And you're going to have some that might want to go and be liberal, more liberal. Faisal was, you want the restraints pulled off of you. Faisal was assassinated in 1975 by a nephew, Faisal ibn Musaid, who was promptly executed. Another brother, Khalid, assumed the throne. The next prince in line had actually been Prince Muhammad, but he had relinquished his claim to the throne in favor of Khalid, his only full brother. Khalid died of a heart attack in 1982 and was succeeded by Saud, the eldest of the powerful Sudari Seven, so-called because they were all sons of Ibn Saud by his wife, Hassa al-Sudari. So these Sudari Seven are the ones, they're all from one wife, is what this is referring to. So though he had many wives, these 7 came from this one wife. Saud did away with the previous royal title of His Majesty and replaced it with the honorific custodian of the 2 holy mosques, in reference to the 2 Islamic holy sites of Mecca and Medina in 1986. A stroke in 1995 left Fahad largely incapacitated. His half-brother, Crown Prince Abdullah, who was descended on the maternal side from the rival Rashidi. So there was a marriage that went with a rival there to bring them together. Gradually took over most of the kingdom's responsibilities until Fahad's death in August 2005. Abdullah was proclaimed king on the day of Fahad's death and promptly appointed his younger brother, Sultan bin Abdulaziz, the Minister of Defense and Fahad's second deputy prime minister, as the new heir apparent. On 27th of March 2009, Abdullah appointed Prince Naif interior minister as his second deputy prime minister and crown prince on the 27th of October. Sultan died October 2001 while Naif died in Geneva, Switzerland on the 15th of June 2012. On the 23rd of January 2015, Abdullah died after a prolonged illness, and his half-brother, Crown Prince Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, was declared the new king. So if I'm following this, because the names are also similar, is that this Salman is the one they call MBS, right? Was that 2015, or that's when he came on the scene, right?
I don't know, but I know it was recent, so it sounds accurate.
Many princes and government officials have been arrested in 2017 in alleged anti-corruption campaign by the king and crown prince. United States President Donald Trump has expressed support for the arrest. And we know that he's the one that's there when Khashoggi was, is that how you say his name, was also killed. So there's a lot of corruption underneath his, he's an interesting one too. And I don't, there's a lot of details still to be understood, but there's a on Frontline, there's a video you can watch, and I think I sent this one to you, Brother Richard, and I think others had watched it, but the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia on Frontline channel that helps with some of that as well, and what he's doing. Due to its authoritarian and quasi-theocratic rule, the House of Saud has attracted much criticism during its rule of Saudi Arabia. There have been numerous incidents, including the Wahhabi Ikhwan militia uprising during the reign of Ibn Saud. Osama bin Laden, a critic of the US, was a critic of Saudi Arabia and was denaturalized in the mid-1990s. And it's interesting to see where he comes from, the bin Laden family, and how they got their wealth. That when the Saudi Arabia came into all this oil, and I think it's under Faisal, and we have those notes coming up. I think it's under Faisal, where they began, because the first one kind of seemed to make a mess of things, and he's the one they deposed and put Faisal, I think it was, in his place. And then they started to become really, really wealthy. And I think the one following that was even more so. But they had more money than they could spend. And that's when they started all this growth in building and construction. And that's where the bin Ladens came in. There were many people going in and getting contracts with Saudi Arabia for building. And the bin Laden family was one of them. And the bin Laden family got their wealth from that, those contracts in construction, from what I understood it to be. So, so you have Osama bin Laden, a critic of the US, was a critic of Saudi Arabia and was denaturalized. And he was raised, remember, with this education of Wahhabism. And he was denaturalized in the mid-1990s. On November 20th, 1979, the Grand Mosque seizure saw the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca violently seized. This is the temple in Mecca, violently seized by a group of 500 heavily armed and provisioned Saudi dissidents, led by Taibi and Abdullah al-Qahtani, consisting mostly of members of the former Ikhwan, which was linked to Wahhabis, militia, but also of other peninsular Arabs and a few Egyptians enrolled in Islamic studies at the Islamic University of Madinah. The Saudi royal family turned to the ulema, remember they were the religious scholars, who duly issued a fatwa, and if I understand a fatwa, it's kind of like a religious decree, permitting the storming of the holy sanctuary by the Saudi forces. So the Saudis are the keepers, I'm trying to think of the words it said, the keepers of the two holy mosques, right? And it's now you've got these dissidents, these conservatives and these dissidents that don't like what they're seeing. And they go in and there's a violent siege here. And the Saudis then go to the religious sect to get a fatwa, which from best I understood was like a religious decree that allows them to go in and storm the holy sanctuary by the Saudi forces, aided by French and Pakistani special ops units. According to Lawrence Wright, the GIGN commandos did convert to Islam. Most of those responsible, including Al-Taibi himself, were beheaded publicly in 4 cities of Saudi Arabia. There's some videos you can watch on the secrets, I don't remember the title of it, one that talks about the secrets that Saudi Arabia doesn't want you to know, and it's all this, the punishments that they do publicly. They do public beheadings and public scourges of people that has brought about great revolution in, people fighting against it. And these are all recent things. This is talking about in the history, but these are all recent things that still happen to this day. The woman that was tried to drive in from, I think she was in the United Arab Emirate, and decided to drive into Saudi Arabia, was immediately taken into custody, and she spent 70-something days in custody. There are others that speak out against the Saudi government, the Saudi family, that are then imprisoned and tortured, and then also many of them executed. So anyone that speaks out against the Saudi family, the Saudi government, is generally seems to be executed. In January 2016, Saudi Arabia executed the prominent Shiite cleric Sheikh Nimr, who had called for pro-democracy demonstrations, along with 47 other Saudi Shia citizens sentenced by the Specialized Criminal Court on terrorism charges. And this sheikh, it's one of the videos that I was watching. His son. There's a video that talks about his son, and then it shows his parents as well. His son, how he was arrested for talking against the Saudi state. And from what I've seen so far, the son is actually still alive, but he's been imprisoned and tortured for several years. But then it was in 2016 where they actually killed his father, who was a Shiite cleric. And he wanted, he was calling for pro-democracy demonstrations. So the Taiba is a tribe originating in Saudi Arabia. That was this one right here. Many members of the Saudi royal family descend maternally from the tribe, which is distributed throughout Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. The Taiba are descended from the Bedouin. They trace back to the Madur family and belong to the Qais Alin Confederacy through its previous name, Hazwin. So we've seen some of these names are new, but we've seen some talking about the Mudar, and I think that was the name that goes back prior to 1700, when the first two families went and settled and then grew the Date Grove. I think that's where that link was, the Date Grove, and then they were eventually named leaders of the area. So in the building of the first, becoming the first Saudi state. I don't know what time it is. Are we doing okay on time?
We're like 10 minutes over.
Oh, what do you want to do? We better break. We got Esther to work on, or continue this, whatever anybody wants to do. And I know that some don't always join us in the afternoon, so if they want us to wait till next week, we can do that as well.
That'd be good.
Elaine,
Yes.
could you go back to your map for a moment, please? The one that you commented on, you like maps. Might not understand them all.
Let me do it this way.
Okay. Go out and then go in.
This one?
No, the one further down. No, the political map. Yeah, that one.
Okay.
The reason is I just wanted to make a quick comment, if I could.
Sorry, it shouldn't have
No,
been.
that's okay.
Okay. I don't know.
Because it's kind of interesting. I was just looking for water sources on that map.
Yeah.
And didn't see any. And so I just was doing a little bit of consecutive research and so on. Evidently, Saudi Arabia has fossil aquifers, very deep, deep wells, but the water, when used, it gets used up. It's not replenished. And the other source is desalination, taking out the salt out of salt water. And they do transport it some distances, but mainly the interior part, they have to depend on the aquifers. So there are conflicting reports as to how much water they actually have left. Desalination is very, very costly. And so it's not sustainable for the country. And part of the reason why I was looking at that is because the north end of the Red Sea, or rather Persian Gulf, where Iraq and Iran, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, yes, right where your mouse is, and down south, Al-Basra and some of that other area, and a little bit further north, it's basically a river plain, a river delta in a sense, you could say, but it's very swampy. And what's been happening there is that the water is being used higher up, further north on both rivers. And there's a bit of competition going on amongst Syria, Iraq, and Iran, all the players, sort of who's getting the most water. And so consequently, the area of Persian Gulf in that delta area is basically without water. And I saw one photograph a couple of weeks back of, I think it was in Al-Basra, where they used to have, they still do have like concrete little canals, running through the city. Sort of like I think it was referred to as the little Venice of the Middle East. And they're all dried up. Like they just get filled with garbage. People just throw waste and garbage into it. And I was thinking, you know, water, and there's a project in Saudi Arabia that was saying, you know, it's running behind schedule. They're probably not even going to get started. It was due to get started in 2021. But just as I was reading and looking at it a little bit as you were continuing presenting, I was thinking, you know, water is really going to become a crucial factor in some way, to some extent. And you look at that map of Saudi Arabia, and I mean, it's all desert.
Yeah.
And yet they've got all these you know, towns, etc. I mean, I'm not sure how many would qualify as cities or anything, but so it's interesting that, you know, as things continue, and oil, you know, the fight over oil is still certainly an issue in that whole region, but how heavily water. And it's interesting because some of their agriculture, they grow wheat and different things, but it's such a water hungry industry. Saudi Arabia actually buys up large tracts of land near Los Angeles, in California, in Arizona, and different other areas in the US to grow alfalfa, which alfalfa has very deep roots and it requires a lot of water to grow, to feed their I was going to say flocks, I'm not sure, you know, probably their cattle, just whatever. And it's just an interesting little adjunct to some of this whole history, you know, that you've been going through, and all the infighting and all the, you know, just different things. So anyway, I just wanted to share that before we disbanded.
No, I appreciate that. It brings up a couple of thoughts that when it said the American came in there and found oil, actually what the Saudis were doing was having the Americans come in to help them find water. And when they were trying to find water, that's when they found oil.
Interesting. One date that had been given for the oil was 1938. Not sure if anything happened prior to that, but
I think it might have been 32. But yeah, so then that's when they found the oil. They were actually looking for water. And then the area that you're talking about in here, this is, I may not have my mouse right in the right spot. I have some other maps in the other study that we're going to do later down the road, the Iran-Iraq War. And it was interesting to see what their battle was over, and that the border of Iran, part of the border of Iran is a river. And we touched on that on Wednesday night, and I didn't know what it meant. And it was after Wednesday night that I started looking into it. You know, there's link after link after link that you can go to, but I found it really interesting to look at that river and why this battle over that river. And it dates back centuries ago, that the deepest channel of a river around the rivers around the world is generally considered the border. And Iraq was saying that the border was the shore on Iran, which caused the problem of these shipping channels to come down into the Gulf. So that's for a later study. But yeah, water's kind of interesting to and just the history of knowing that the Euphrates and the Tigris are here in all of this. And here you have this desert right below. So yeah, we better wrap it up and then have lunch and then come back. But so I think I know I heard at least Brother Richard maybe suggest that you guys would rather we wait and do this next week instead of continue it this afternoon. Either way, we will record it and upload it. So what does everybody want to do?
I think that would be good. Wait.
Okay. On that note, Sister Christine, would you like to close us in prayer? Sure.
So Father in heaven, we thank you so much for bringing us together as a group to study your word, to study the history that you have leading us to that we may understand what's coming. We realize that there's so much to learn and relearn and understand, but we trust that you will help us put these pieces together and help us to understand what is coming, since it is so important. We thank you for blessing us with this wonderful presentation. We pray, Father, for as some of us go to eat lunch, we pray that you will bless the food, make our bodies strong and healthy, fighting off colds and flus, viruses and bacteria. We thank you for the food. We thank you for this wonderful Sabbath day, this blessing, this day of rest, and this day to think of you and pay attention to what's going on in your creation and your love for us. We thank you, Father, and we pray all this in the name of our Lord and Savior, Yeshua. Amen.
So we'll break for lunch. Hang on one second.